The phone rang at 5:30 in the morning. I woke up instantly, as only happens when something is wrong. In my 43 years as a nurse, I had learned to wake up at the first ring and be fully aware of what was happening within seconds. Even after retiring 6 years ago, I had retained this ability. Mrs. Tanner? The voice on the line was professionally restrained, but with notes of sympathy that I knew all too well. This is Dr. Prescott from Anaheim Memorial Hospital. I clenched the phone. Kenneth had gone fishing with his friends the night before. They were going to spend the whole night at the lake. What happened to my husband? I asked, surprised at my own calmness. I'm very sorry, Mrs. Tanner. Your husband was brought to us at around 3 o'clock this morning with a severe heart attack. We did everything we could, but I closed my eyes. I knew what would come next. How many times had I said those words to the relatives of patients? We weren't able to save him, the doctor finished after a pause. My condolences. I thanked him, asked a few questions about when I could pick up the body, and hung up. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I looked at the empty half of the bed. Kenneth didn't like to get up early on weekends. I usually woke up first, made breakfast, and only the smell of freshly brewed coffee could lure him out from under the covers. Now this bed would remain half empty forever. I got up, mechanically put on my robe, and went to the kitchen. I poured water into the kettle and put it on the stove. The familiar morning routine helped me keep reality in focus. As long as my hands were busy, I didn't have to think about what had happened. Kenneth had been complaining of chest pains for the last few months. I insisted on a full examination, but he kept putting it off, saying it was just indigestion from spicy food. It's not indigestion, Ken, I said, but he just waved it off. I'm 69, not 90, Muri. Don't bury me before my time. Now those words sounded bitterly ironic. The kettle whistled. I took it off the stove and made a strong cup of tea. I didn't cry. Over the years working in intensive care, I had learned to deal with grief, to put it off until later. Right now, I had to focus on practical matters, call the children, contact the funeral home, find Kenneth's insurance documents. I took a sip of tea and looked at the clock. 6 in the morning. Iris was probably already awake. She always got up early, even on weekends, to check her students' schoolwork. But Gareth was probably still asleep. My son had never been a morning person, but this couldn't wait. His father had died, and he needed to know right away. I dialed my daughter's number first. Mom? Iris answered almost immediately. Is something wrong? Your father died last night, I said. Straightforward, no preamble. Heart attack. He was fishing with Walter and Fred. They took him to the hospital, but it was too late. There was silence, then a stifled sob. Oh my God, Mom. Are you okay? Iris's voice trembled. I'm managing, I replied. There's a lot to organize. Can you come today? Of course, we'll leave in an hour. Troy and Winslow are coming with me. Darren will be at work until evening, but he'll come too. Mom, I'm so sorry. I know, sweetheart. I'll call Gareth. Do you want me to call him? No, I have to do it. I ended the call, took another sip of tea, and dialed my son's number. The phone rang for a long time. Just as I was about to hang up, Gareth's sleepy voice answered. Hello? Gareth, it's Mom. Mom? His voice sounded worried. Right now, 6:20 in the morning. What happened? Your father died last night. A heart attack. There was a long pause. What? Gareth finally said. How did it happen? I repeated what Iris had told me. Gareth listened silently. The funeral will be on Monday, I said. You need to come as soon as you can. Iris is already on her way. Another pause, then Gareth cleared his throat. Mom, It's terrible, of course, but it's Sheridan's birthday on Monday. We've been planning this party for months. I can't cancel everything. I froze with the cup in my hand. What did you say? Listen, I know this sounds awful, but we've booked a restaurant, invited 50 people. His voice became apologetic. Maybe we could move the funeral to Tuesday. The cup trembled in my hand, and I slowly set it down on the table so as not to spill the tea. You want me to move your father's funeral because of Sheridan's birthday? Mom, you have to understand this is important to her. For both of us. I I just can't cancel everything at the last minute. We've put so much money and time into this. Your father is dead, Gareth. My voice was icy. Your father, who raised you, who paid for your college, who helped you with the down payment on your house. He's dead, and you're telling me you can't come to his funeral because of a party? It's not just a party, Mom. Gareth's voice was tinged with irritation. It's my wife's birthday. It's important to me. I closed my eyes. I remembered holding newborn Gareth in my arms 36 years ago. I remembered Kenneth crying with happiness as he looked at his son. I remembered my husband and I spending sleepless nights at the bedside of our sick baby. I remembered Kenneth working overtime at the auto repair shop to pay for our children's education. How he taught Gareth to ride a bike, fish, and fix cars. Today is my wife's birthday, Gareth repeated emphatically. I heard you the first time, I said quietly. Give Sheridan my best wishes. I hung up without waiting for a response. My hands were shaking, but not from grief, from anger. Our relationship with Gareth had always been complicated. As a teenager, he began to distance himself and rebel against our parental authority. Kenneth often said, "Let him run wild, Murray. All boys go through this." But as the years passed, the alienation only grew. Gareth went away to college in San Diego and rarely came home. After he met Sheridan, his visits became even less frequent. Sheridan. I sighed, remembering our first meeting. A beautiful, confident girl with ambition and a sharp tongue. She immediately disliked Gareth's parents, especially me. Too simple, I once heard Sheridan say on the phone, thinking I couldn't hear her. His mother has been a nurse all her life, and his father is a car mechanic. They've never even been to Europe. Kenneth laughed at that. She's still young, Murray. She'll grow out of it. But Sheridan didn't grow out of it, and Gareth fell more and more under her influence. Soon he was as ashamed of his parents as she was. The phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Visits became a chore. Christmas, Thanksgiving, sometimes Kenneth's birthday or mine. No more than that. Kenneth still loved his son unconditionally. He's our boy, Murray, no matter what happens. He continued to hope that one day Gareth would grow up and realize the value of family. I was less optimistic, but for my husband's sake, I held on to that hope. And now Kenneth was dead, and our son couldn't come to the funeral because of his wife's birthday. I got up and walked over to the window. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, painting the Anaheim sky a soft pink. Our house in the old part of town was surrounded by similar neat single-story houses built in the 60s. Kenneth and I bought it 35 years ago when Iris was 7 and Gareth was 3. We paid off the mortgage in 15 years, saving on everything. But it was worth it. The children had a house with their own yard to play in. I remembered how Kenneth built a tree house for the children in the corner of the garden. Iris was delighted and spent hours there reading books. Gareth also loved the treehouse until he became a teenager and decided it was childish nonsense. When the children grew up and moved away, Kenneth and I discussed moving to a smaller apartment. But in the end, we decided to stay. The children need a place to come home to, Kenneth said. He dreamed that one day our house would be filled with grandchildren. We do have grandchildren now, 2 from Iris. Troy, now 15, is serious beyond his years and passionate about programming. An 8-year-old Winslow is lively and curious with Kenneth's eyes. They often visited their grandparents on vacations and weekends, but Gareth and Sheridan didn't have children. Career first, Sheridan would say. Maybe in a couple of years. But the years passed, and the decision was put off. I sighed and turned away from the window. I had to keep calling. The funeral home, the insurance company, friends and relatives. It was going to be a long day. Later, when the main calls had been made and the initial shock had begun to subside, I sat down in Kenneth's chair in the living room. His old leather chair, worn on the armrests, had kept the shape of his body. I had never sat in it before. It was his place, his territory. Now I sank into it as if trying to feel my husband's presence. The phone rang again. I glanced at the caller ID, Gareth. I hesitated, but then picked up the phone. Yes? Mom, I've been thinking, and maybe I could come over for an hour or two on Monday morning before I start getting ready for the party, he said without greeting me. just to, say goodbye to Dad. I clenched the phone so tightly that my fingers turned white. The funeral is at 2 o'clock, Gareth, I said in an even voice. But don't worry. I'm sure your father would have understood that Sheridan's birthday is more important. Mom, don't start, he said, his voice tinged with irritation. I'm trying to find a compromise. A compromise? I felt something break inside me. Your father is dead. This is not a situation for compromise, Gareth. Either you come to say goodbye or you don't. You're making a mountain out of a molehill, he exclaimed. Dad would have understood. He was always more reasonable than you. Those words hit harder than he could have imagined. Kenneth had always been softer on Gareth, always finding excuses for his behavior. He just hasn't found himself yet, Murray, he would say when Gareth quit another job or didn't show up for family dinner. Give him time. Your father loved you unconditionally, I said quietly. Even when you disappointed him over and over again, he continued to believe that one day you would grow up and become a man who could be relied upon, a man who understands what family means. Obviously, he was wrong. You know what? Gareth's voice turned cold. I'm calling you, trying to find a solution, and you're attacking me with accusations. If that's how you feel, maybe I shouldn't come at all. That's your choice, Gareth. It always has been and always will be your choice. I hung up and sat there for a long time, staring at the phone. Something had changed in me during that conversation. It was as if a string that had been stretched tighter and tighter over many years had snapped. The front door opened. Iris had arrived with the children. I heard their quiet voices in the hallway, then quick footsteps. Winslow ran into the room and threw herself into my arms. Grandma, Mom said Grandpa died, she whispered, climbing onto my lap. Is it true? I hugged my granddaughter, breathing in the scent of her hair, apple-scented shampoo. Yes, sweetie, it's true. Is he in heaven now? Winslow asked, looking up at me with eyes so much like Kenneth's. I think so, I replied, although I wasn't sure about the afterlife myself. But it seemed like the right answer at the time. Iris and Troy entered the room. My daughter looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying. Troy, tall for a 15-year-old, stood straight, but his lower lip was trembling. Mom! Iris came over and hugged me, careful not to disturb Winslow. How are you? I'm managing, I replied. I'm glad you're here. Did Gareth call? I nodded, not wanting to discuss my conversation with my son in front of my grandchildren. But Iris understood everything from my expression. He's not coming, is he? She asked quietly. It's Sheridan's birthday on Monday, I replied. They were planning a big party. Iris shook her head but said nothing. Instead, she stood up and offered to make tea for everyone. Troy came over and awkwardly put his hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, Grandma, he said seriously. Grandpa was the best. I covered his hand with mine. Yes, he was, I agreed. And he was very proud of you. It was true. Kenneth adored his grandson, especially after the boy had developed an interest in mechanics. They often spent weekends in the garage, tinkering with an old car that Kenneth was restoring as a hobby. Now that car would remain unfinished, like so many other things in Kenneth's life. In the evening, when the grandchildren were asleep in their room, the room that had always been theirs at their grandparents' house, Iris and I sat in the kitchen with glasses of wine. I can't believe he's gone, Iris said, staring into space. Dad always seemed so constant, like he'd always be here. I nodded. I still couldn't quite comprehend that Kenneth wasn't coming home. No more coming in with a bang, throwing his keys on the hall table, kissing me on the cheek with his usual "Hi, Murray." What about Gareth? Iris asked, breaking the silence. Do you really think he won't come to the funeral? He made it clear that Sheridan's birthday is more important, I replied. Iris shook her head. Sometimes I just don't understand him. How can he treat his own family like that? I took a sip of wine. I'd been thinking about it all day, about how our son had turned into a man who valued a party more than saying goodbye to his father. Where did we go wrong in raising him? What could we have done differently? You know, I said, looking at my daughter, your father always said that one day Gareth would grow up and understand the value of family. He believed that until the day he died. Did you? I shook my head. I hoped he was right. But today I realized that some people just don't change, and that there are consequences for every choice we make. Monday morning dawned unexpectedly clear. I stood at the bedroom window, looking at the cloudless sky, thinking how unfair it was that on the day of Kenneth's funeral, nature had decided to provide perfect weather. It should have been raining. Gray clouds, gusty winds, and cold drops drumming on the roofs of cars. That would have matched my mood. But instead, the sun flooded the streets of Anaheim, as if mocking my grief. Mom? Iris peeked into the room. Are you almost ready? Darren says it's time to go. I nodded, running my hands over my perfectly ironed black dress. I had bought it 3 years ago for my sister's funeral, and hoped I wouldn't have to wear it again so soon. Yes, I'm coming, I replied, taking one last look in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was someone I hardly recognized. Always fit and energetic, I now looked 10 years older. The fine lines around my eyes had deepened, and the silver strands in my chestnut hair seemed to shine brighter. I ran my hand through my hair. Kenneth had always loved to stroke it, and turned away from the mirror. My daughter, husband, and grandchildren were waiting for me downstairs. Troy, serious and silent, wore a dark suit that made him look like a little adult. Winslow, in a black dress with a white collar, her hair braided, held a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. I picked them for Grandpa this morning, she said, handing me the bouquet. They're his favorites. I swallowed the lump in my throat and crouched down in front of my granddaughter. Those are very pretty flowers, sweetie, I said, hugging the girl. Your grandfather would have loved them. Darren, Iris's husband, shifted awkwardly from foot to foot at the door. He always felt out of place in emotional situations, but he was a rock for Iris and the children, and I appreciated that. Is everyone ready? He asked, glancing at his watch. Yes, I replied, straightening up. Let's go. On the way to the church, I looked out the window at the streets of Anaheim passing by. Kenneth and I had lived here our entire lives together. Our children were born here, and we grew old together here. Every turn, every building held a story. There was the supermarket where Kenneth bought groceries every Saturday. He had his own list and never deviated from it. There's the park where we used to walk on Sundays when the kids were little. And there's the gas station where Kenneth met Walter, his best friend, 30 years ago. They were both trying to fill up their cars when an accident happened, and they spent 2 hours waiting for the police and talking about fishing. It was with Walter that Kenneth went on his last fishing trip. I noticed the car slowing down and looked up. We were approaching the small Methodist church where Kenneth and I were married 44 years ago. Back then, it was decorated with white lilies and blue ribbons, but now there was a hearse at the entrance and people in dark clothes were slowly entering. Darren parked the car and we headed toward the church. At the entrance, we were met by Walter, gaunt and pale, in a rumpled suit that was clearly too big for him. Muriel, he hugged me awkwardly, like a man unaccustomed to showing emotion. I'm so sorry. If I could have done something. You did everything you could, Walter, I said softly, patting him on the shoulder. Kenneth spent his last evening doing what he loved, in the company of his best friend. Don't blame yourself. He nodded, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, and stepped aside to let us in. The church was half full. Kenneth had never been a particularly sociable man, but the few people he considered friends loved him dearly. His colleagues from the auto repair shop, where he had worked for almost 40 years, sat in a group in black suits, looking unusually solemn. There were a few neighbors we had known for years, relatives, few in number, mostly on my side, as Kenneth had only one younger sister, Lorraine, who was now sitting in the front row, hunched over with grief. I sat down next to her, and Lorraine squeezed my hand with her thin fingers. "Where's Gareth?" she whispered, looking around. I shook my head, not wanting to tell her the truth, that my son had chosen his wife's birthday over his father's funeral. But I could see from Lorraine's face that she understood. Ken would have understood, she said after a pause, but there was no conviction in her voice. The service began. I listened to the priest talk about life, death, and resurrection, but the words went in one ear and out the other. Instead, I stared at the coffin covered with bouquets of flowers and wondered what Gareth was doing. Was he helping Sheridan decorate the house for the party? Was he greeting guests? Was he thinking about his father at all? When it was time for remembrances, I stood up first. I stood before the congregation, my knees shaking, but my voice remained steady. Kenneth Tanner was a good man, I began simply. Not perfect, but good. He was a reliable husband, a loving father and grandfather, and a loyal friend. He didn't strive for great achievements or wealth. He just wanted those he loved to be happy and safe. I told them how we met, a young nurse and a shy mechanic whose car I accidentally scratched in the hospital parking lot. How he asked me out for coffee instead of arguing about the repair. How we got married just 6 months later because, as Kenneth said, when you know it's right, why wait? I remembered how we bought our first house, small and in need of repair, but it was ours. How Kenneth worked overtime so we could afford good schools for the children. How he always found time to go to school meetings or help with homework, even though he was tired after work. He wasn't perfect, I continued, looking at the faces in front of me. We had difficult times. There were arguments and misunderstandings. There was a period when we almost lost each other. I didn't go into detail about that difficult time 20 years ago, when we almost got divorced. About how Kenneth moved out temporarily, how we went to therapy, how slowly and painfully we rebuilt our relationship. That was our private business, not for public discussion. But we got through it together, I said instead. And we came out stronger. Kenneth taught me that true love isn't a magical feeling, but a daily choice you make over and over again. The choice to be there, to support, to forgive. My gaze fell on the empty seat next to Iris, the seat where Gareth should have been sitting. The choice to be there. The choice my son didn't make. I finished my speech and several other people spoke after me. Walter, who awkwardly joked about fishing through his tears. Kenneth's boss from the auto shop, who talked about his professionalism. Iris, who talked about what a caring father he was. Even Troy found the courage to say a few words about his grandfather, who taught him how to fix his bike and never got angry when something broke. After the service, everyone went to the cemetery. I watched as Kenneth's coffin was slowly lowered into the ground and felt a strange numbness. There were no tears. They had all been shed in the previous days. Only emptiness and the realization that a part of my life, the most important part, was over forever. Winslow came up to me and took my hand. "Grandma, will Grandpa be cold there?" she asked quietly. I sat down next to my granddaughter. "No, sweetie. Grandpa isn't really there. His body is there, but he himself," I faltered, not knowing how to explain death to an 8-year-old child, especially when I wasn't sure of my own beliefs. "He himself is in a better place. And in our hearts, of course." Winslow nodded seriously, as if the explanation made sense to her, and placed her small bouquet on the ground. After the cemetery, everyone gathered at my house. Iris and Darren took care of the guests while I sat in Kenneth's chair, accepting condolences and mechanically thanking everyone for coming. I felt detached, as if I were watching everything from the sidelines. "Where's Gareth?" I heard this question over and over again from different people. A neighbor who remembered him as a child, a former colleague of Kenneth's, whose son was friends with Gareth at school, a distant relative who had last seen him at Christmas 5 years ago. He had urgent business to attend to, I replied each time, without going into details. I didn't want to make my son look bad in front of others, even though I was seething with anger inside. By evening, most of the guests had left. Only the closest ones remained. Lorraine, Kenneth's sister, was going to spend the night before returning to her home in San Diego. Iris and her family also stayed. They planned to stay with me for the whole week to help with the paperwork and just be there for me. When the children went to bed, the adults gathered in the kitchen. Darren opened a bottle of whiskey that Kenneth had kept for special occasions and poured everyone a glass. "To Kenneth," he said, raising his glass. "To a good man." "To Kenneth," we echoed. I took a sip and felt the alcohol burn my throat. Kenneth liked to drink whiskey in the evening sometimes, sitting in the backyard and looking at the stars. "The best way to end the day," he used to say. "I still can't believe Gareth didn't come," Lorraine said, swirling her glass. "Ken was so proud of him." "It's Sheridan's birthday," I said flatly. "They're having a big party." Lorraine stared at me, her mouth open. "You're joking," she said finally. He missed his father's funeral for a birthday party? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Oh my God, Lorraine muttered. I knew that woman was a bad influence on him, but it's not just Sheridan, Iris sighed. Gareth has always been complicated. She just exacerbated what was already there. I listened to them discuss Gareth and thought about how my son had changed over the years. The sweet boy who brought me flowers from the neighbor's yard, much to the neighbor's dismay. The sullen teenager who constantly argued with his father. The ambitious young man who always wanted more money, more recognition, more success. I remembered our last serious conversation, 3 years ago, when Gareth came to ask for money for a new business venture. Kenneth wanted to give him the money. He's our son, Muriel. We have to support his dreams. But I insisted on seeing a business plan first. The plan was vague, the risks high, and the potential profits questionable. When we refused, Gareth accused us of never believing in him. We've always believed in you, Gareth, I said at the time. We just don't believe this particular project will work. He stormed out and didn't speak to us for several months. Are you okay, Murray? Lorraine's voice brought me back to the present. You look tired. I'm fine, I replied automatically. Just a lot to do. Take your time, Lorraine said, covering my hand with hers. You have time, but I knew that some things couldn't be put off. Tomorrow I would have to call Linwood Ellery, our family lawyer. Kenneth and I had drawn up a will 10 years ago when we both discovered health problems. I had high blood pressure and he had early-stage diabetes. It was a simple will. The house, savings, and investments were to be divided equally among the children, with lifetime use for the surviving spouse. The family cabin in the mountains, which we had bought 20 years ago, was to go to Gareth, as he had always loved it more than Iris. But now I knew I had to change those arrangements. Not out of revenge. I wasn't a vengeful person, but because my son had made it clear that he didn't value family ties. That meant he shouldn't inherit family property, which he would probably just sell at the first opportunity. I think I'd better get some sleep, I said, finishing my whiskey. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Lorraine and Iris exchanged glances but didn't argue. They helped me up and walked me to my bedroom as if I were disabled rather than just tired. The bedroom was exactly as it had been when Kenneth was alive. His slippers by the bed, his reading glasses on the nightstand, his old sweater, carelessly thrown over a chair in the corner. I couldn't bring myself to put those things away. As long as they were there, I could pretend he had just stepped out and would be back soon. I got into bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and turned on my side, staring at the empty space next to me. 44 years we had slept in this bed. 44 years of bedtime conversations, arguments, reconciliations, plans for the future. 44 years of the warmth of another body next to me, of breathing that slowed as Kenneth fell asleep. Now there was only emptiness. I reached out and touched Kenneth's pillow. It still held his scent, a mixture of aftershave, motor oil, which never completely disappeared even after a shower, and something indefinable that was simply Kenneth. In the darkness, alone with myself, I finally allowed myself to cry. Not loud sobs, but quiet tears rolling down my cheeks onto the pillow. I mourned not only the loss of my husband, but also the loss of a son who had turned out to be so far removed from the values Kenneth and I had tried to instill in him. You were right about a lot of things, Ken, I whispered into the darkness. But not about Gareth. He's not going to change, and I'm not going to pretend that he will anymore. In the morning, I would call Linwood Ellery and change the will. The cottage would go to Iris and her children. Gareth's share of the rest of the estate would be minimal, enough to comply with the law, but no more. The rest would go toward my grandchildren's education and securing their future. This decision brought me no satisfaction, only a bitter determination. I would protect what remained of Kenneth's legacy from a man who did not appreciate him in life and did not honor him in death. With that thought, I finally fell asleep, clutching my husband's pillow tightly, as if it could keep him close, if only for a little while longer. Linwood Ellery's office was located in a small, one-story building in downtown Anaheim. I had been here several times over the past 20 years. When Kenneth and I were drawing up our wills, when we were executing powers of attorney in case of incapacity, when we were settling matters of inheritance after my sister's death. Each time, the place made me feel vaguely uneasy, reminding me of the inevitability of death and the need to plan for what would come after. Today, as I sat in the waiting room waiting to be called, I felt a strange sense of calm. It had been 3 days since Kenneth's funeral. Iris and her family were still staying with me, but this morning I insisted on going to the lawyer's office alone. "Mrs. Tanner," said an elderly secretary with kind eyes and gray hair pulled back in a neat bun as she emerged from the office. "Mr. Ellery is ready to see you." I stood up, adjusted my dark blue suit jacket, and entered the office. Linwood Ellery, a thin man with a neatly trimmed gray beard, rose from behind his desk and walked toward me with outstretched hand. "Muriel," he said, shaking my hand with both of his, "please accept my sincere condolences. I would have come to the funeral, but I was in Boston visiting my daughter." "Thank you, Linwood," I replied. "I understand. We've known each other for so many years that formalities are no longer necessary." Linwood was 5 years older than me, but he looked younger than his 73 years. He had been friends with Kenneth since Kenneth repaired his car 30 years ago, and then he became our family lawyer. "Have a seat." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Tea? Coffee?" "No, thank you," I said, sitting down and placing my bag on my lap. "I'd like to get right to the point." Linwood nodded and sat down across from me, folding his hands on the desk. "You want to change the will?" he said, not asking a question. "Yes," I confirmed, significantly. Linwood didn't look surprised. He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a folder labeled Tanner. "Before we begin," he said, leafing through the documents, "I must ask, is this a decision you've thought through carefully? Are you sure you're not acting on emotion because of your recent loss?" I appreciated the question. Linwood was not only my lawyer, but also a friend who genuinely cared about my well-being. "I've thought about this for 3 days, Linwood," I replied calmly. "And yes, of course my decision is related to Kenneth's death. But it's not impulsive. It's just that circumstances have changed, and I have to change my plans accordingly." He looked at me intently over his glasses, then nodded. "All right, let's see what we have here," he said, opening a folder. "According to the current will that you and Kenneth drew up 10 years ago, with minor changes 5 years ago, in the event of the death of one spouse, the other receives lifetime use of all property. Upon the death of the surviving spouse, the property is divided equally between the children, Iris and Gareth, with the exception of the mountain cabin, which goes to Gareth. Is that correct?" "Yes," I confirmed. "That's exactly what I want to change." Linwood took out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. "Tell me what changes you would like to make." I took a deep breath. Despite my firm decision, it was harder to say it out loud than I had expected. "I want to change the distribution of my estate after my death," I began. "First, the mountain cottage should go to Iris and her children, not Gareth." Linwood wrote this down without showing any reaction. "Second, I want the majority of my savings and investments to be distributed as follows. 50% to the educational accounts of my grandchildren, Troy and Winslow, 25% to each. This money should be available to them only to pay for their education and, after graduation, to purchase their first home or start a business. Not before they reach the age of 21. Linwood continued writing, nodding periodically. "I want to leave 30% to Iris. 10% I want to keep for myself to ensure a comfortable retirement and medical expenses if necessary. And for Gareth..." I paused. "For Gareth, I want to leave the minimum share required by law so that he cannot contest the will, and some of Kenneth's personal belongings that might have sentimental value to him. His collection of old tools, fishing tackle, wristwatches." When he had finished writing, Linwood put down his pen and looked at me. "May I ask why you've made these changes?" His tone was professional, but his eyes showed understanding. "Especially regarding Gareth?" I knew that question would come. I didn't want to make my son look bad, but Linwood needed to know the reasons for such significant changes to the will so that it would be as secure as possible against any future challenges. "Gareth didn't come to his father's funeral," I said simply. "He decided his wife's birthday was more important. When I called to tell him about Kenneth's death, he said he couldn't cancel the party and even suggested postponing the funeral. Linwood blinked. It was the only sign of surprise he allowed himself. I see, he said after a pause. That's an unusual decision on his part. It's not just that, I continued. In recent years, Gareth has become increasingly distant from the family. He rarely visited us and hardly spoke to Kenneth. And 3 years ago, he came to ask for money for some dubious business venture. When we refused, he accused us of never supporting him. I paused, gathering my thoughts. I don't want this to look like revenge, Linwood. It's not revenge. It's protecting what was important to Kenneth and me. We always wanted our children to value family, to support each other. Iris understands that. She's been by my side all these days, supporting me, bringing the children so they could say goodbye to their grandfather. And Gareth, I shook my head. Gareth has shown that he has other priorities. Linwood tapped his pen thoughtfully on the paper. Do you think Kenneth would have approved of this decision? The question caught me off guard. I froze, imagining my husband's reaction. Kenneth had always been softer, more forgiving toward his son. He believed with all his heart that Gareth would change, grow up, and learn to value family ties. I don't know, I replied honestly. Maybe he would have given Gareth another chance, but I took a deep breath. Kenneth is gone, and I have to make my own decisions. Linwood nodded. I understand, and I will draw up a will according to your wishes. But as a friend, I want to say that doors can always be left open. A will can be changed again if circumstances change. I nodded, though I doubted that Gareth would ever change enough for me to reconsider my decision. One more question, Linwood continued. Do you want Gareth to know about these changes now? Or would you prefer that he find out after you're gone? I thought about it. Part of me wanted Gareth to know the consequences of his choice immediately. But another part, the mother part, still hoped to protect him from pain, even if that pain was deserved. He should know, I finally decided. It would be fair. He's a grown man and should understand that every choice has consequences. In that case, I'll prepare a formal letter for him after the new will is signed and registered. That should take about a week. Okay, I said, feeling a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from my shoulders. We spent another hour discussing the details of the will, clarifying the wording, listing specific assets and how they should be distributed. Linwood patiently explained the legal intricacies, while I tried to focus on the practical aspects and not let my emotions get the better of me. When we were done, I felt exhausted but calm. The decision had been made and I knew it was the right one. I'll send you a draft of the will within 3 days, Linwood said as he walked me to the door. Review it carefully. If you have any changes, let me know. Then we'll meet to sign it. Thank you, Linwood. I shook his hand. For everything. You're welcome, he smiled gently. And Muriel, you are a strong woman. Kenneth always admired that about you. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I held them back. See you soon, Linwood. Leaving the lawyer's office, I got into my car but didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I just sat there, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, hands with protruding veins and age spots, hands that had held newborn Gareth 36 years ago. I remembered how tiny he was, with his red, wrinkled face and surprisingly strong grip. How he looked at me with his dark eyes full of trust and love. How Kenneth was afraid to even touch him at first, afraid that his rough mechanic's hands might hurt such a fragile creature. What went wrong? When did we lose him? Was it a gradual process? Or was there a moment, a turning point, after which everything changed? I remembered when Gareth was 14. He wanted to go to a concert in a neighboring town with his friends, but Kenneth and I said no. Too far, too late, no adult supervision. He got really angry, yelling that we controlled his life, that we didn't trust him. Then he left and didn't come back until morning. It turned out he had gone to the concert after all. Kenneth and I reacted differently. I wanted to punish him severely, take away his allowance, and forbid him from seeing his friends. Kenneth said that would only push him further away. He's growing up, Muri. He needs space. We have to trust him. In the end, we compromised. Gareth was punished, but more leniently than I thought necessary. Maybe that was a mistake? Maybe if we had been stricter, if we had set clearer boundaries? I shook my head. There was no point in thinking about it now. What was done was done. Gareth had grown up the way he was, and no amount of thinking about the past would change that. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. On the way home, I thought about Iris and my grandchildren waiting for me there. About Troy, who was so much like Kenneth in his seriousness and quiet reliability. About little Winslow with her boundless energy and curiosity. They were the future of our family. They were the ones who would preserve the memory of Kenneth, of our family traditions, of the values we had tried to pass on. And the cottage in the mountains, the place where Kenneth spent the best moments of his life, where he taught the children to fish, where we watched the sun rise on the porch with a cup of coffee, should belong to those who will cherish these memories, not just see it as an asset to be sold. When I turned onto our street, I saw Troy and Winslow playing in the yard. Winslow spotted me first and waved, her face breaking into a wide smile. I waved back, feeling my heart warm. I parked the car in the garage and went into the house. Iris was in the kitchen, preparing lunch. "How did it go?" she asked, without looking up from cutting vegetables. "Fine," I replied, taking off my coat. "Linwood will take care of everything within a week." Iris nodded without asking any further questions. She knew I was changing my will, but she didn't know the details, and I was grateful to her for not pressing me. "I thought I'd make that vegetable pie your dad loves so much," she said instead. "Remember how he always asked for seconds?" I smiled, feeling both the warmth of the memory and the sharp pain of loss. "I remember. He said your pie was even better than mine." "He was just being polite," Iris laughed. "No one cooked better than you." I walked over and hugged my daughter. She froze for a moment, then put down the knife and hugged me back. "Thank you for being here," I whispered. "Of course, Mom," she replied. "Where else would I be?" At that moment, Troy and Winslow burst into the house, noisy and excited after their game. "Grandma!" Winslow rushed over to me. "Look what I found in the garden." She held out a stone with an unusual shape, resembling a heart. "It looks like a heart, see?" She pointed to the shape. "I think Grandpa sent it to us from heaven." I took the stone, smooth and warm, from her small hands. "It's very beautiful," I said. "And yes, it really does look like a heart." Troy rolled his eyes, but I noticed the corners of his mouth twitch into a smile. "You can keep it, Grandma," Winslow offered generously. "So you won't miss Grandpa so much." I clutched the stone in my palm, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'll take good care of it." At that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. Iris's children, my grandchildren, were the future Kenneth had dreamed of. They deserved to inherit not only material things, but also the intangible things: family traditions, memories, a love of nature, respect for the past, that Kenneth and I had cherished so much. And if that meant making a difficult choice, so be it. After all, as I said at the funeral, true love is a daily choice. Sometimes that choice is painful, but that doesn't make it any less right. I looked at the heart-shaped stone and silently said to Kenneth, "I will protect what we created together. I will preserve it for those who truly appreciate it." That evening, after Iris and the children had gone to bed, I sat in the living room, looking through old photo albums. Pictures of Gareth from infancy to college graduation, his first day of school with a huge backpack and a nervous smile, Christmas holidays when he excitedly unwrapped his presents, fishing with Kenneth, his first catch, the pride on the faces of father and son. Somewhere between those happy moments and today, something went wrong. Something changed, and looking at the photos, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it happened. Was it college, when Gareth was away from home for the first time and perhaps began to feel ashamed of his simple parents? Or was it when he met Sheridan, an ambitious girl from a wealthy family whose parents were a doctor and a professor? Or was it a series of small hurts and misunderstandings that had built up over the years until they formed an insurmountable chasm? I closed the album and put it aside. There was no point in tormenting myself with these questions anymore. Whatever had happened in the past, Gareth had made his choice today, and I had made mine. At that very moment, in his home on the other side of town, my son was probably celebrating his wife's birthday, unaware that his choice had changed his future, and the future of his family, forever. Gareth Tanner slammed the door of his car and whistled as he walked home. It had been a good day. 2 successful deals and commissions that would help reduce his ever-growing mountain of debt. He stopped at the mailbox and pulled out a stack of envelopes. Bills, advertisements, catalogs, the usual stuff. But one stood out, a plain white envelope with a law firm's logo. Frowning, Gareth opened it right there on the driveway. Inside was a letter on official letterhead from Ellery and Partners. He began to read, and his expression gradually changed from bewilderment to shock and finally to horror. Dear Mr. Tanner, we hereby notify you that your mother, Mrs. Muriel Tanner, has made significant changes to her will. As her solicitor, I am obliged to inform you of the following. Under the new will, the family cottage in the mountains passes to your sister, Iris Parker, and her children. You are no longer a beneficiary of this property. In addition, the distribution of the remaining property has also been changed. You will receive the minimum share of the inheritance provided for by law, as well as some of your late father's personal belongings. Mrs. Tanner asked me to convey that this decision is due to your absence at your father's funeral and is final. If you have any legal questions, please contact me at the number provided. Sincerely, Linwood Ellery, attorney for Mrs. Muriel Tanner. Gareth read the letter twice, unable to believe his eyes. A cottage in the mountains. His cottage. The very one he had already sold in his mind to pay off his creditors, who were becoming more insistent with each passing day. Debts that even Sheridan didn't know about. No, he whispered, clutching the letter so tightly that his knuckles turned white. She couldn't have done that. But she had. His mother, always so sensible and calm, had deprived him of his inheritance because of one missed event. Yes, it was his father's funeral, but hadn't he explained the situation? Didn't she understand that he couldn't cancel Sheridan's birthday, which had cost them nearly $5,000, money they didn't really have? Gareth entered the house, tossing the rest of the mail onto the table in the hall. Sheridan was at work and wouldn't be home until 6. He had time to think about how to break the news to her. Or should he keep quiet? She didn't know about his plans to sell the cottage, the loans he'd taken out over the past 2 years, the credit cards he'd taken out in her name without her knowledge. No, he had to talk to his mother. This was some kind of misunderstanding. She couldn't seriously be disinheriting him. She just wanted to scare him, teach him a lesson. Gareth grabbed his phone and dialed his mother's number. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. He hung up and dialed again. And again. After the 4th attempt, the answering machine said that the subscriber was temporarily unavailable. Damn it! He threw the phone on the sofa. The next number on his list was Iris's cell phone. His sister answered after the 3rd ring. Gareth! Her voice sounded surprised. What's wrong? You know what happened, he snapped. Don't pretend you don't know. There was a pause. Are you calling about Mom's will? Iris finally asked. Yes, damn it, the will. She left you the cottage. My cottage. Gareth, it was never your cottage. Iris's voice grew colder. It belonged to Mom and Dad. And they always said it would be yours one day, but what? But I missed the funeral. And now she's decided to punish me. That's so childish. You really don't understand, do you? Iris's voice sounded less indignant than weary. It's not just about the funeral, although that was the last nail in the coffin. It's how you treated them these past few years. How rarely you visited, how you constantly belittled their efforts, how you asked for money and then disappeared for months at a time. I was busy. I have my own life, my own family. So do I, Gareth. But I made time, because I knew they weren't going to be around forever. And now Dad's gone, and you didn't even come to say goodbye. Gareth ran his hand through his hair, feeling panic rising inside him. Look, I know I screwed up, but it can be fixed. Talk to Mom, convince her to change her mind, at least about the cottage. You don't need it, but I do. Do you need it? Iris interrupted. When was the last time you were there? 4 years ago? 5? You always said it was boring there, that it was a hole in the middle of nowhere. And now suddenly it's vital to you? Gareth clenched his teeth. He couldn't explain to his sister the real reason for his anxiety. It's a matter of principle. he said instead. Mom has no right to punish me like this. It's not punishment, Gareth, it's consequences. There's a difference. Fuck you, he spat and hung up. Gareth collapsed onto the sofa, feeling his insides twist with fear and anger. He needed money, a lot of money. Otherwise, everything would collapse. The house of cards he had been building for the past few years. 3 loans from different banks, loans from colleagues, secret purchases hidden from Sheridan. It had all been piling up, turning into an avalanche that was about to bury him. The cottage was his lifeline. It was worth at least $500,000. A wooden house in the mountains on a large plot of land in a picturesque location popular with tourists. It would be enough to pay off his debts and start with a clean slate. And now it was all gone. And all because of what? Because he didn't show up at a damn funeral? Gareth grabbed the phone again and dialed his mother's number. There was still no answer. Then he decided to go to her right now, to talk to her face to face. She couldn't refuse to let him in. Her son. He was already heading for the door when he heard the sound of a car pulling up. Sheridan was back earlier than usual. Gareth quickly hid the letter in his pocket and tried to keep a neutral expression on his face. Sheridan entered the house, her heels clicking on the parquet floor. She was tall and slender, with immaculately styled blonde hair and makeup that didn't look a bit worn even at the end of the workday. "You're home already?" She looked surprised. "I thought you had a meeting with clients until 6. "The meeting was postponed," Gareth lied. "Why are you home so early?" "My last patient canceled," she said. She worked as an administrator at a prestigious dental clinic. "Did something happen? You look strange." Gareth hesitated. Telling her the truth would mean opening Pandora's box, not only about the changed will, but also about his debts, his plans for the cottage, everything he had been hiding for the past few years. But on the other hand, there was no point in hiding it any longer. Sooner or later, it would all come out. "I received a letter from my mother's lawyer," he said finally. "She changed her will. The cottage goes to Iris and her children. I only get the minimum legal share, whatever that means." Sheridan stared at him, her perfectly plucked eyebrows knitting together. "What? Why did she do that?" "Because of the funeral," Gareth shrugged, trying to sound less troubled than he felt. "She's still angry that I didn't come." "That's ridiculous!" Sheridan threw her bag on the sofa. "It was my birthday. We'd been planning it for months. What were you supposed to do? Cancel everything at the last minute?" "That's exactly what I told her." "And she disinherited you?" Sheridan shook her head. "That's so petty, so childish." Gareth felt a vague irritation at her using the same words he had used in his conversation with Iris. But now was not the time for such thoughts. "I was going to go see her, talk to her in person," he said. "She can't just take away my inheritance like that. It's not fair." "Of course it's not fair." Sheridan took off her jacket and hung it on the back of a chair. "But are you sure it's a good idea to go see her right now? You look upset." "How do you think I'm supposed to look?" Gareth snapped. "My mother just took a $500,000 cottage away from me." Sheridan froze, studying his face. "$500,000?" she asked. "How do you know how much it's worth?" Gareth bit his tongue, realizing he had said too much. "I just guess," he said, turning away to avoid her gaze. "Real estate prices are rising, especially in places like that." "Gareth," Sheridan's voice was low and dangerous. "You're not telling me everything." He knew that tone. He knew that when Sheridan suspected something, she wouldn't back down until she got to the bottom of it. And now, when he was already on the edge, he didn't have the energy for another game of cat and mouse. "I owe money," he said, still not looking at her. "A lot of money." "How much?" "About 400,000. There was a silence so deep that you could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Then Sheridan made a strange sound, something between a laugh and a sob. "Please tell me this is a joke," she said. "I wish it was a joke," Gareth finally turned to her. "It built up gradually. First one loan, then another." "Wait," Sheridan raised her hand. "You took out loans? Without my knowledge?" Gareth nodded, feeling the color drain from his face. "At first it was small amounts, then I had to take out more to cover the first loans, then even more." "And you were going to sell the cottage to pay it off?" Sheridan looked at him as if she were seeing him for the first time. The cottage that doesn't even belong to you. It was going to be mine, Gareth exclaimed. It would have been if Mom hadn't decided to punish me. What did you think would happen when your parents found out you sold the family cottage right after you got it? Gareth lowered his eyes. I thought by then they wouldn't find out. Sheridan covered her face with her hands. My God, she muttered. You were hoping they would die so you could sell the cottage and no one would ask any questions? No, not exactly. I didn't want them to die, Gareth faltered, realizing how terrible his words sounded. Listen, that's not important right now. What's important is that we're in trouble, serious trouble. We? Sheridan lowered her hands, and Gareth saw that her eyes were filled with tears, a rare sight for his always composed and controlled wife. No, Gareth, it's not a we. It's you. You took out these loans. You planned to sell the cottage. You lied to me about all of this. I didn't want to worry you, he tried to justify himself. I knew you'd be upset. Worried? Sheridan laughed, but it was the laugh of someone on the verge of tears. You owe almost $500,000. That's not worried, Gareth. That's a disaster. How could you? How could you do this behind my back? Gareth didn't know what to say. How could he explain that it had all started with a desire to give her the lifestyle she was used to in her parents' house? Expensive restaurants, designer clothes, vacations in Hawaii, all the things they couldn't afford on their salaries. And then came the gambling, first as a way to make quick money to cover the expenses, and then as an addiction he couldn't control. I'm sorry, he said finally. I screwed up, but we can fix this. If I talk to Mom, explain the situation. You're going to tell your mother that you took out loans for $400,000 and planned to sell the family cottage to pay them off? Sheridan shook her head. That will only confirm everything she thinks about you. The words hit him harder than she could have imagined. What do you mean? Gareth asked quietly. She always thought you were irresponsible, Sheridan shrugged. She thought you didn't value your family, that you were selfish. And you know what? Now I'm starting to think she was right. Gareth felt anger rising inside him, a convenient emotion to drown out his shame and fear. So now you're on her side? He raised his voice. After everything she said about you? After she looked down on you all these years? She never looked down on me, Gareth, Sheridan said wearily. You made me think she didn't approve of me. But every time we met, she was polite and friendly. It was you who was always tense and aggressive in their house. Because they never believed in me. Gareth punched the wall, leaving a dent in the drywall. They always thought I wasn't good enough. And did you prove them wrong? Sheridan asked quietly. With your loans and your lies. Gareth fell silent, feeling as if all the air had been sucked out of him. He sank down onto the sofa, suddenly feeling the weight of all his decisions, all his mistakes. What are we going to do? He asked, staring into the void in front of him. Sheridan was silent for a long time. When she spoke, her voice sounded strangely detached. I don't know what you're going to do, Gareth, but I'm going to call my parents. Maybe they can help. And then, she took a deep breath, and then we'll need to have a serious talk about our future. What do you mean? Gareth looked up at her, feeling a new wave of panic wash over him. It means I'm not sure I can stay with someone who lies to me so easily. Sheridan turned away and headed for the stairs. I need to be alone. Don't bother me. Gareth listened to her footsteps receding, to the bedroom door slamming shut. He was left alone in the living room, with the letter in his pocket and his life in ruins around him. He took the letter out again and reread it. The words blurred before his eyes, but one phrase stood out clearly. Mrs. Tanner asked me to tell you that this decision is due to your absence at your father's funeral and is final. Final, like everything his mother did. She never backed down from her decisions, never changed her mind if she was sure she was right. Kenneth was softer, he could always be persuaded, made to change his mind. But not Muriel. And yet Gareth had to try. He couldn't let his life fall apart because of one mistake, one wrong choice. He reached for the phone again and dialed his mother's number. This time, to his surprise, the phone was answered after the fifth ring. Yes? Muriel's voice sounded wary. Mom? Gareth felt a sudden sense of relief that she had finally answered. I need to talk to you. I know why you're calling, Gareth, she replied in an even voice. Linwood said he sent you a letter. Mom, you can't do this to me. It's not fair. Not fair. Her voice took on a bitter tone. It wasn't fair that your father died and you didn't come to say goodbye. It's not fair that you neglected your family for years and now you suddenly remember us when it comes to your inheritance. That's not true, Gareth exclaimed. I loved Dad. It's just circumstances were unfortunate. Circumstances are always unfortunate, Gareth, Muriel said. Life is full of difficult choices, and we have to take responsibility for our decisions. Gareth closed his eyes, feeling a lump growing in his throat. Mom, please, I need your help. I'm in trouble. There was a pause, and for a moment Gareth thought she had softened. What kind of trouble? Muriel finally asked. Gareth swallowed. He couldn't tell her the truth about the debts, the loans, his plan to sell the cottage. It would only strengthen her resolve. Financial problems, he said vaguely. Nothing serious, just temporary difficulties. And you thought you could solve them by selling the cottage? There was no question in her voice. Gareth flinched. How did you... I wasn't born yesterday, Gareth, Muriel interrupted. And I know you better than you think. You never liked that cottage. You always said it was boring, that there was no internet, that it was in the middle of nowhere. And suddenly you're upset that I transferred it to Iris? The only reason that could hurt you so much is if you were planning to sell it. Gareth was silent, realizing that she could see right through him. How much do you owe? Muriel asked after a pause. What does it matter? Gareth snapped. You're not going to help anyway. I didn't say that. Her voice softened, and for a moment Gareth heard the mother he had known before. The one who was always ready to support, help, and protect him. I just want to know the extent of the problem. Gareth hesitated. Maybe if she knew how serious the situation was, she would change her mind. Maybe a mother's love would overcome her hurt after all. Almost 400,000, he finally admitted. Loans, credit cards. My God, Gareth, Muriel gasped. How could you let this happen? It didn't happen overnight, he said, feeling tears welling up in his throat. First a little, then more. I thought I could fix it, but does Sheridan know? She does now, Gareth recalled his wife's expression as she climbed the stairs. She didn't take it very well. I'm not surprised, Muriel said wearily. Gareth, I can't just give you the cottage. It won't solve the problem, it'll just delay the inevitable. You'll sell it, pay off your debts, and then what? Start borrowing again? Gareth didn't answer because deep down he knew she was right. But I can help you in another way, Muriel continued, if you really want to fix this. How? Hope crept into his voice. Come see me tomorrow, she said. We'll talk in person, no emotions, no accusations, like adults. Okay. Gareth felt some of the weight lift off his shoulders. Thanks, Mom. Don't thank me yet, she replied. I'm not promising anything yet. And Gareth, come alone. No Sheridan. No Sheridan, he repeated. Okay. When the conversation ended, Gareth sat for a long time, staring at the phone in his hand. Tomorrow he would go to his mother's. Tomorrow, perhaps, there would be a way out of the nightmare his life had become. But right now, in this moment, he felt only emptiness and a strange relief that everything had finally come out. No more pretending, lying, hiding. And in that emptiness, as if in a mirror, he saw himself clearly for the first time. A man who had run away from responsibility for years, who had betrayed the trust of those closest to him, who had put his momentary desires above family ties. And in that reflection, he did not recognize himself. Or maybe it was the opposite. He finally saw himself as he really was, without masks and self-deception. The door upstairs slammed. Sheridan had left her bedroom. Gareth heard her footsteps on the stairs and braced himself for the continuation of a conversation that could be the beginning of the end of their marriage. Or, if he was lucky, the beginning of something new and more honest. The morning was cloudy. Gray clouds hung low over Anaheim, promising rain but only threatening for now. Gareth sat in his car parked across from his parents' house, unable to bring himself to get out. He had arrived earlier than planned. His mother was expecting him at 11, and it was only 10:30. The night had been terrible. After a long conversation with Sheridan, filled with tears, accusations, and bitter confessions, she had packed her things and left for her parents' house. "I need time to think," she had said goodbye. "And so do you." Gareth had hardly slept all night, trying to figure out what to say to his mother, how to explain the depth of his problems without making himself look even more like a failure in her eyes. He looked at the house where he had grown up and remembered how his father had taught him to ride a bike on that very driveway, how his mother planted flowers in the flower beds that still framed the lawn, how they all sat together, him, Iris, Mom, and Dad, on the porch on summer evenings, eating ice cream and looking at the stars. This house had once been his refuge, a place where he always felt safe. When had everything changed? When had he started to see it as a cage he needed to escape from? When had his parents' love and care begun to feel suffocating? Gareth sighed and finally decided to get out of the car. He didn't have a key to his parents' house. He had given it back to his mother several years ago when she suggested he come by sometimes to check on the house when his father and she were away. At the time, it had seemed like a burden, an unnecessary responsibility that was better off declined. Now he regretted that decision, as he did so many others. He climbed the steps to the porch and rang the doorbell. He heard footsteps inside, and the door opened. Muriel stood in the doorway, wearing a simple house dress and a cardigan. She looked tired, with deeper wrinkles around her eyes than he remembered and more gray hair. "You're early," she said instead of greeting him, but stepped aside to let him in. "Yes, Gareth got stuck. I couldn't wait any longer." Muriel nodded as if she understood. She always understood him better than he wanted her to. "Come into the kitchen," she said. "I've just put the kettle on." Gareth followed her, feeling strange in a house he had once known like the back of his hand. Little had changed over the years. The same photographs on the walls, the same curtains, the same furniture. But now the house seemed quieter, emptier without his father's loud voice, without his laughter echoing through the rooms. In the kitchen, Muriel gestured to a chair and began making tea. Gareth sat down, nervously drumming his fingers on the table. "How are you?" he asked awkwardly, trying to start a conversation. "How can a widow be doing a month after her husband's death?" Muriel replied without turning around. "I'm managing." Gareth felt a pang of guilt. He should have been there for her during this difficult time, supporting her, helping with paperwork and practical matters. Instead, he hadn't even called to see how she was after that fateful day of the funeral. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "about your father, and for not coming to the funeral." Muriel finally turned to him, holding 2 cups of tea. She placed one in front of him and sat down opposite him. "I didn't ask you here to hear your apologies, Gareth," she said. "What's done is done. We both know you can't change your mind after the fact." "But I want to explain," Gareth insisted. "I couldn't cancel Sheridan's birthday. We spent so much money, invited so many people." "And that was more important than saying goodbye to your father," Muriel finished. "I understood that the first time, Gareth. You don't need to repeat it." Her calmness knocked him off balance. Gareth had expected anger, accusations, even tears, but not this cold acceptance, which was worse than any rage. "I screwed up," he finally admitted. "I know that. And if I could go back—" "But you can't," Muriel interrupted. "None of us can. So let's talk about the present, about your problems, about the debts you've accumulated." Gareth took a sip of tea, trying to collect his thoughts. He hadn't expected her to get straight to the point without any preamble. "You were right yesterday," he said finally. "I owe almost 400,000 to various creditors, banks, loan companies, even a few colleagues at work." "And Sheridan didn't know?" "Not until yesterday." Gareth shook his head. "Now she does. And she's gone to her parents. She said she needs time to think." Muriel nodded but didn't comment. Instead, she asked, "How did you get yourself into such debt, Gareth? What happened?" He wasn't prepared for that question, although he should have expected it. How could he explain to his mother that it had all started with a desire to impress his wife and her family? That he wanted to appear more successful than he really was? That gambling had then become a quick fix for his problems, and then a new problem he couldn't cope with? I wanted more than I could afford, he said finally. Sheridan and I were living beyond our means. Expensive restaurants, vacations, designer clothes. And then, when the money ran out, I started gambling. I thought I could make a quick buck and cover our expenses, but I just got deeper and deeper into it. Muriel looked at him for a long time, and Gareth saw not condemnation in her eyes, but deep sadness. Your father always said that real wealth isn't what you can afford to buy, but what you can afford not to have, she said finally. It's a shame you didn't learn that lesson. I know, Gareth said, lowering his head. Believe me, I understand that very well now. And what do you plan to do? Muriel asked. Apart from selling the cottage, which isn't yours anymore. I don't know, he replied honestly. That's why I came to you. I need help, Mom. I'm desperate. Muriel took a sip of tea, thinking about his words. Rain began to fall outside the window. First a few drops, then harder, drumming on the roof and creating a background noise that made their conversation even more intimate. I can help you, Gareth, she said finally. But not in the way you expect, and not without conditions. What conditions? He asked, feeling both hope and anxiety. First, I won't change the will, Muriel said firmly. The cottage will remain Iris's and her children's. That's not up for discussion. Gareth wanted to argue, but held back. Now was not the time for arguments. Second, Muriel continued, I won't give you $400,000 just like that. I'm not going to pay for your mistakes without any guarantee that you won't make new ones. I understand, Gareth nodded. What do you propose? I can pay off some of your debts directly to your creditors, the most urgent ones, with the highest interest rates, about half of the total amount. You'll pay the rest yourself, little by little. But what about— I'm not finished, Muriel interrupted him. In return, you'll have to see a psychologist who specializes in gambling addiction, regularly, and send me the receipts for your visits. Gareth felt his face flush. He had never admitted that he had a gambling problem, but his mother had somehow figured it out on her own. How do you know about gambling? He asked. I wasn't born yesterday, Gareth, Muriel smiled sadly, and I saw how it destroyed your father's brother's life. Do you remember Uncle Ralph? He lost everything, his home, his family, his job. He died alone in a cheap motel. I won't let the same thing happen to you. Gareth vaguely remembered Uncle Ralph, a tall, boisterous man who sometimes showed up at family gatherings and then stopped coming. His father rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with such sadness that Gareth didn't dare ask for details. Okay, he agreed. I'll see a psychologist. And one more condition, Muriel added. You must be honest with me and with Sheridan. No secrets, no lies. If you have any problems, financial or otherwise, you must tell us right away, not try to solve them yourself and make the situation worse. Gareth nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief at these conditions. They were strict but fair, and most importantly, they gave him a chance to get out of the hole he had dug himself into. Thank you, Mom, he said, his voice trembling. I don't know how I deserve your help after everything I've done. You're my son, Gareth, Muriel replied simply. No matter what happens, you'll always be my son. I may be disappointed in your actions. I may not approve of your decisions, but I will never stop loving you. The words hit him like a punch in the gut. Simple, sincere, devoid of sentimentality. Gareth felt tears welling up in his eyes. Dad would have said the same thing, right? He asked hoarsely. Yes, Muriel nodded. Only he might have been a little gentler with his conditions. He was always softer with you. And I took it for granted, Gareth shook his head. I thought his love and support were something I could always count on, something that would always be there for me. And now he's gone, Muriel finished. And you can't tell him how sorry you are. How much you appreciate everything he did for you. It's a hard lesson, Gareth. But maybe it's exactly what you needed to learn. Gareth nodded silently, not trusting his voice. They sat like that for a while, listening to the rain drumming on the roof, each lost in their own thoughts. You know, Muriel finally broke the silence, that old car your father was restoring is still in the garage. He never finished it. The '67 Ford Mustang? Gareth remembered. He worked on it for as long as I can remember. Yes, Muriel smiled. It was his long-term project. He wanted to finish it by his 70th birthday so that you and Troy could take it for a spin together. He said it would be a 3-generation Tanner road trip. Gareth felt something tighten in his chest. He hadn't known about his father's plans. He hadn't known that Kenneth had envisioned a future that included him, Gareth, and Troy together. I can't finish this work, Muriel continued. I don't know anything about cars. Neither does Iris. And Troy is still too young to do it on his own. She looked at Gareth expectantly, and he understood her unspoken request. You want me to finish the car? He asked. If you want to, Muriel shrugged. Your father taught you everything he knew about mechanics, and it would be a good way to honor his memory. Gareth was silent, thinking about her words. Restoring an old car would take time, patience, and regular visits to his parents' house. It meant spending time with Troy, teaching him what his father had once taught him. It wasn't just a project. It was a way to rebuild family ties he had ignored for so long. I'll do it, he said finally. Not for you or even for Dad, for myself, and for Troy. Muriel nodded, and something that looked like approval flashed in her eyes, an expression Gareth hadn't seen in so long that he'd almost forgotten what it looked like. Good, she said. You can start this weekend if you want. Troy usually comes over on Saturday mornings. Does he know about me? Gareth asked cautiously. About me not coming to the funeral, about the will. He knows you weren't at the funeral, Muriel replied. Not about the will. That's none of his business, at least not yet. Gareth nodded, feeling grateful that his mother wasn't turning Troy against him, despite everything that had happened. What about Sheridan? Muriel asked unexpectedly. What are you going to do about your marriage? Gareth sighed. It was a difficult question to which he had no clear answer. I don't know, he admitted. It depends on her. If she decides to give me another chance, I'll do everything I can to be better, to be more honest, more responsible. If not, he shrugged, I'll have to accept it and move on. Has your attitude toward her changed? Muriel asked, looking at him intently. After everything that's happened? Gareth thought about it. He loved Sheridan. Her intelligence, her determination, her self-confidence. But was it healthy love or dependence? A desire to live up to her expectations? Her standards? I don't know, he replied honestly. I always thought she was the best thing that ever happened to me. That I didn't deserve her. Maybe that's why I tried so hard to create the appearance of success, getting myself into debt. So she would be proud of me. So she wouldn't leave me for someone more successful. And now? Now I realize that a relationship like that can't be healthy, Gareth said. If love is based on fear of loss, on a desire to impress, rather than on mutual respect and support, then it's not real love. It's dependence. Muriel nodded, as if he had confirmed her own thoughts. Your father and I didn't always get along, she said unexpectedly. We went through some difficult times when we almost got divorced. You probably don't remember. You were about 16. But we made it work because our marriage was based on mutual respect. We saw each other as equal partners, not as a pedestal to climb or an anchor to drag us down. Gareth vaguely remembered that period. His father had temporarily moved out. His mother was constantly tense, and the atmosphere in the house was oppressive. But he was so preoccupied with his teenage problems that he didn't think much of it. And then things somehow worked out. His parents got back together, and life went on. I didn't know you had such serious problems, he said. We didn't want to burden you and Iris, Muriel explained. But now I think maybe that was a mistake. Maybe if you had seen that even the strongest relationships have difficulties, that love isn't just joy but also work, you would have been better prepared for adult life. Gareth was silent, thinking about her words. Maybe she was right. Perhaps he had always idealized his parents' relationship, seeing it as a standard that was unattainable in real life, and therefore had never even tried to build something similar in his own marriage. What would you have done in my place? He asked suddenly. With Sheridan? With our marriage? Muriel thought for a moment, twirling an empty cup in her hands. I would be honest, she said finally, with her and with myself. I would ask myself if I really love this man, the way he is, not the way I want him to be. And I would ask if she loves me the same way. If the answer to both questions is yes, then it's worth fighting for the relationship. If not, sometimes it's better to let go than to cling to something that causes pain. Gareth nodded, feeling that these words had touched something deep inside him. Maybe this was the conversation he had needed all these years. Direct, honest, without embellishment or consolation. Thank you, Mom, he said, for everything, for not turning your back on me, despite all my mistakes. I will never turn my back on you, Gareth, Muriel said softly, but I will not indulge your weaknesses or excuse your poor decisions. I'll be there to help you up when you fall, but not to carry you. He smiled, recognizing his mother in those words. Direct, honest, loving in her own way, without unnecessary sentimentality. I understand, he said, and I appreciate it more than you know. They talked for a long time that day, about the past, the future, Kenneth, Troy, and Winslow, even Sheridan. And although many questions remained unanswered, Gareth felt that something had changed between them. It was as if the wall he had built over the years was slowly crumbling. When he left, the rain had stopped and the first rays of sun were breaking through the clouds. Muriel walked him to the door. Come on Saturday, she said. Troy will be happy to see you. He always asks about his Uncle Gareth. Really? Gareth was surprised. Even after I missed the funeral? Children are more forgiving than adults, Muriel shrugged. And wiser sometimes. Troy said that maybe you were just too afraid to say goodbye to your grandfather because you loved him too much. Gareth felt a lump rise in his throat. Perhaps there was more truth in his nephew's words than he was willing to admit, even to himself. I'll come, he promised. 9 in the morning as usual? As usual, Muriel nodded, and something like hope flashed in her eyes. See you soon, son. See you soon, Mom, Gareth replied and stepped down from the porch. As he got into the car, he turned and saw that Muriel was still standing in the doorway, watching him. She raised her hand in a farewell gesture, and he responded in kind. It was a small gesture, but it held a promise of new encounters, new conversations, perhaps even a new beginning. The drive home seemed shorter than usual. Gareth thought about the upcoming conversation with Sheridan, about what he would say to her, how he would explain his feelings, his doubts, his hopes. He didn't know how the conversation would end, but for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face the consequences of his decisions head-on without running away or deceiving himself. And on Saturday, he had a meeting with Troy and the old Ford Mustang in the garage, a project his father hadn't had time to finish before he died, but which had now become a thread connecting 3 generations of Tanners. Perhaps by working on this car, Gareth would be able to rebuild what had been destroyed in his family: trust, respect, love. This was not the end of the road, but only the beginning. The beginning of a difficult but necessary process of healing, not only of his relationships with his mother Sheridan and himself, but also of his memories of his father, whom he had never seen on his last journey, but whose legacy he now had to preserve. And although the will remained unchanged, the cottage went to Iris and her children, and Gareth received only a small share of the inheritance. He began to understand that Kenneth Tanner's true legacy was not in material possessions, but in the lessons of life, love, and responsibility that he had tried to pass on to his children. Lessons that Gareth was only now beginning to truly appreciate.